Great.
Okay, good.
Hello, Dr. Rachel. How are you?
Hi, Alexis. I'm really well, thank you. And I'm so glad to be back on here with you. How are you going?
I am extremely well. We really missed you. I've got to say, it's good to be back. Good to have you back.
Yeah, it's good to be here. And I know that you got to talk with some of my lovely colleagues over the last 2 or 3 weeks.
Yes, what a beautiful group that you work with. It's been interesting to get some new perspectives and input, and to speak with the community last week. There is plenty of opportunity to engage with us. So we'll be giving you some more information on that at the end.
Mm-hmm.
But without further ado, a very cool topic today. On how our childhood experiences play out in our romantic relationships in adulthood. So I know I have loads of questions for you. I did ask my daughter and her friends. I've got a list that I need to report back to for them. And listeners, this is a really beautiful opportunity to have Dr. Rachel's brain to pick. So please post us your comments, send us your questions.
Yes.
We get to really unpack this today. So would you like to start, Rachel, by sharing perhaps some of your case studies or some of your experiences around clients who've had, who you've seen this issue play out with?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Because as I was saying to you before we jumped on, I've seen the effects of childhood experiences play out in people's adult experiences in so many ways, and in really obvious to the trained eye, obvious ways, and some really subtle ways also. And I want to start out by saying that there's always an interplay. When we look at our relationships in adulthood, there's an interplay between our personality, our temperament, and our early experiences and how they molded and shaped us. And there was an interplay when we were developing as a child, of course, as well, because different children, as you know, as a mother with two children, have the same parents, and yet they might interpret the same things differently, right? Have you noticed that?
Definitely, yes.
Mm-hmm. And so the temperament of the child, which is genetic, whether they're an extrovert or an introvert, or, kind of really naturally organized or naturally a bit chaotic, these kinds of temperamental traits will affect the child's proneness to traumatization is one of the things. Some people are more prone to traumatization than others. And that's partly to do with their personality and temperament. And I could say a lot about that, but I just really wanted to make the point that there's this real interplay between nature and nurture.
Okay, and so it's not always very predictable. There's not a particular formula that, A equals B. There's going to be variations along the way.
Exactly. So particularly in my work, when I'm getting to know a client over many, many sessions, I'll often give them a personality inventory at some point, more and more in the last few years, and my love of personality psychology has stuck. And also, taking their history, their family of origin experiences. And yeah, I mean, of course, obvious things come to mind, like abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, which are all too common in this society and in the work that I do. But it's not just trauma, and it's not just abuse. It's also childhood emotional neglect, which is probably a topic for another live stream down the track, I think, because emotional neglect, all of us have experienced to some extent in our development. And there were small moments of empathic failures where the caregivers just didn't see us, they didn't notice us, they didn't see what we were feeling and needing, and they didn't respond to us. Now that, of course, if I say it like that, we can all think of times where our teachers or our parents, weren't there for us. So that emotional neglect is a shared experience that's universal, but some poor folk had such chronic emotional neglect growing up. They felt so invisible. They didn't feel like, they were being seen, heard, understood by their caregivers, that they kind of conclude unconsciously that there's nobody in here worth getting to know if their parents and caregivers aren't trying to get to know their inner world. We talk in so many therapies about getting to know your inner world and the inner world of others you love. And that's in the Gottman method as well, the love maps, knowing your inner world. It's so important that it's in every therapy, this idea of emotional attunement or emotional connection. And, as you and I have talked about this, and I've spoken with other people in recent days, thinking about how I parent. Now, of course, I'm not a perfect parent. There's been plenty of failures on my part to tune into my children emotionally for one reason or another. But there's also been heaps of moments, and you probably relate to this, where I've said to my kids, what do you think about that? What are your ideas about that? Or do you feel this way? Or how do you feel about that? And I'm genuinely curious, and I want to know what's going on for them. And I want to know specifically what they're reacting to, what hurt their feelings, what exactly their fears are. And as we have those conversations about their inner world, they start to feel like all of that stuff is valid and they have legitimate thoughts and feelings and needs. And over time, that's very good for their self-esteem and for their resiliency. So they have this feeling of, I'm worth knowing. So it brings self-worth. I can hear them out there being very lively in the kitchen right now, using all that confidence to bring it into the world. And I hope that that will be stand them in good stead for their adult relationships. And I'm wondering if you relate to what I've just said about parenting.
Yes. So, all right. So what I'm hearing you talk about is that we can influence our children and their future relationships by attuning to them, taking a genuine interest in them as human beings and inquiring of them, what are your thoughts? What matters to you? So essentially getting them in contact with their needs, right?
With their needs, with their true self, however you want to say it, with their values and with their personality. Getting to know your kids means I know this one's an extrovert and this one's an introvert and this one likes this kind of stuff and that one likes that kind of stuff. And, having that all be quite valid, because I've got many clients who'll tell me they grew up in, say, a family that was very religious and individual differences were not highly valued in some of those church-going families. It was more about, towing the line of aligning with the doctrine of the church, for example. And the parenting style was very deferential to the teachings of the church, which left that even if they had a very safe, warm, stable, loving environment, that child still gets the message of, my uniqueness isn't very important and may rebel later as a consequence, but may still have work to do even later in adulthood to kind of get to know who they really are. And of course, in a relationship, a long-term romantic relationship, there's a lot of tuning in, how are you traveling? How did that impact you? What are you feeling? What do you care about here? What are your needs? There's so much that has to happen in a healthy, functioning adult relationship that if the person has trouble with that from their, early attachment experiences, there's still work there for them to do.
Okay, so that begs the next question. If I've been raised in a way that I don't feel I received attunement, what can I do to increase my chances of a constructive, healthy romantic relationship?
Well, luckily there are many resources, tools and methods for doing that. I mean, going to couples counseling, if you choose a therapist who's trained in the Gottman method or emotion-focused therapy, would be a good start, because those methods are really about listening to one another, getting to know one another more deeply, managing conflict better, being vulnerable. It's all about building capacity for vulnerability, really, because the thing is, and that will improve There's heaps of great books. There's great websites. Gottman.com is a wonderful website with lots of resources. But, a child who's vulnerable to his or her parents, or is tempted to be vulnerable when they're young, and then receives criticism, punishment, judgment, or just being plain ignored, the message that child gets is, don't be vulnerable. And if we reach adulthood and we don't know how to be vulnerable, you can see how we'll end up with potentially an avoidant attachment style where we shut down, we get afraid of intimacy, or perhaps we have a push-pull relationship with closeness. So we get too close and we freak out, and then we shut down and pull away, and then we, get a bit anxious because we all want attachment. And so it's just such a great thing to recognize some of these patterns as the first crucial step. And then, there's lots of options. There's so much on the internet. There's group programs people can go into to work on their attachment relationships, and there's therapy. Yeah.
And is it possible for somebody to work on that within themselves?
Without a partner.
Without a partner, yeah.
Absolutely, because this affects all the teaser for this live stream was about romantic relationships, because I do work with a lot of that. But this attachment stuff and our capacity for vulnerability, whether it's limited or expanded, this affects all of our relationships. It affects relationships with family members and with colleagues and with friends. And it's a lifelong project. I definitely have increased my capacity for vulnerability in the last, 7 or 8 years. And I can see where I hit my edges. And that's interesting to me. I don't beat up on myself, but I think, okay, there's more I can do here. So getting a secure attachment is a lifelong project. I also wanted to make sure I said that.
Yes. A minor digression before I get to my questions that my daughter and her friends asked, but
yes,
I'm interested to hear about how building a more secure attachment with yourself has influenced the quality of your relationships, if you'd be willing to share that.
Yeah, definitely. I think I'm fairly fortunate in that I managed to get a fairly secure attachment through my teens with my mother. I don't think it was particularly secure earlier in childhood, but she went off to therapy, hence my perception of the value of therapy. And by the time I hit 20, she and I had a pretty secure attachment relationship. So that was so fortunate for me. But as I've increased my self-belief and self-confidence, I guess it sounds so blunt to say it like this, but I don't care as much about what other people think of me, which is not quite true, actually. Of course, I care very much what people think and feel, but I'm able to sort of have better boundaries, I guess, psychologically, and kind of go, well, I can say no, or I can ask for what I want. And of course, that's much better in my friendships and with my children and everywhere.
And how does better boundaries influence the quality of your relationships? How does that improve your relationship?
Well, it's still a work in progress for me, because I see where I can be so trusting and forgiving that sometimes I don't speak up, because boundaries are about speaking up, really. Speaking up to say, hey, I'm unclear about this, or I'm not okay with this, or to say no, or ask for what we want, perhaps. And I just think that affects everything we do. Sorry, my mind's jumping around a lot. Not sure if I answered the question.
Well, no, what I'm hearing is that a more secure attachment with yourself helps you to recognize who you are, and therefore what's important to you, and therefore that it's worth speaking out. And
Yes.
that makes sense, that the ability to speak, advocate for ourselves, if you like, is going to increase the quality of our relationships. It's going to improve our ability to collaborate. It's going to achieve our outcomes. The relationships serve a purpose, all of them. So
Yes,
it relies heavily on me knowing myself and who I am, and being able to share that, communicate that.
yes. And that's right. And so if I didn't get that experience earlier in life from my caregivers, that there's somebody in here worth knowing and worth sharing with others, then, that definitely puts us behind the 8 ball in adulthood. But there is always somebody in here worth getting to know and worth developing for yourself and sharing with others. So, it's taken a lot of convincing for some of my clients, that you are interesting, you are unique, you are likable, you are worth investing in, and figuring out what your needs are, learning to express them, and figuring out who you are. And of course, if we don't keep working on that stuff, we end up sliding into submissiveness and becoming a doormat, or we compensate by becoming aggressive and judgmental and critical and angry. And we all know the pain that it leads to kind of go too far down the submissive or the aggressive tracks. You know, this is really about kind of deep assertiveness, and deep assertiveness is really requires you to know yourself. But I'm really curious about this conversation that you had with your daughters and her friend, daughter and friends.
So, bit of a recap, though before that, I'm hearing that, we can facilitate our children's adult relationships by taking an interest in them as human beings, and we can also set ourselves up for improved romantic relationships by taking a genuine interest in ourselves. And that's where therapy, of course, is awesome, as is any self-exploration right behind you. So yes, I had, this was only about less than an hour ago, I walked in, and my daughter is going through this gorgeous phase where they're kind of bohemian, they're finding their own fashion, they're getting into Pink Floyd and the Arctic Monkeys, and they've always got their own kind of vibe, and they're lazing around. There's 3 of them in her bedroom. And I said, no joke, I said, if you had access to the smartest woman on the planet who knows how minds work, and you had the opportunity to ask them about how your childhood experiences play out in your adult relationships, in your romantic relationships, what would you ask them? And this is what they said. So they said, is it true, like straight for the jugular, is it true that women who go for older men have daddy issues?
Okay. Do you want to talk about this?
Not really, no. But yes. So I guess they're talking about Oedipus or Electra complex, and whether that has any basis. I did have a chance to look that up, and it seems that Freud basically he built the whole theory of the Oedipus complex around one case study, Little Hands. So N equals 1. It's kind of been disputed, but it seems that Bowlby and attachment theory and a couple of others have supported the fact that there is a relationship. So that was the first one. And then that obviously led on to, well, what if your boyfriend reminds you of your brother? Is there such a thing as brother issues? And then what about, the parent of the same sex? Like, is there such a thing as mummy issues? If my mom's not affectionate, am I not going to be affectionate?
These are great questions.
They were really great questions. Yes.
And I think that they come up quite naturally for teenagers and young adults because it's archetypal. It's across all of culture and all of time. I think we all have an intuitive sense, don't we? And, it has names in psychology like the mother complex and the father complex, which we'll go into. But, we all have an intuitive sense that our relationships, particularly with our mother and our father, do have an effect. They do shape the way that we feel about ourselves and relationships, our trust or our mistrust in the world. I noticed a comment in the comments I was just checking now from Stephanie about her dad and having to be invisible to be safe with her mum. Those kind of early experiences where just to survive our family of origin, and to navigate those situations with parents and siblings, maybe we did have to shut ourselves down, or maybe we did have to puff ourselves up, and maybe we did end up with beliefs about men or about women or about humans or about ourselves that we've carried pretty unconsciously into our adult relationships, or sometimes lack thereof, because there's so little trust in others. And like most people, although they can't articulate it, we understand it, don't we? We get it. Even these teenagers, they're onto it. They know.
Yes, they do. They then started going into, same-sex relationships. If the line was this, if your dad has psycho killer kind of vibes, is it going to increase your chances of being gay, or at least a feminist? Like, if your dad hits your mum, screw all men. That was their comment. As you say, do we generalize that if that's what a man is, the archetype, as you say, then all men bastards.
And I think that's the stereotype, is that a certain kind of mother or father will lead to a certain kind of approach to the world and maybe even affect our sexuality and sexual development. And I think sometimes that's true, but it's, because of the temperament, the stuff I started out with, the personality differences, each child, I've worked with a lot of survivors of sexual abuse, childhood sexual abuse. And what's really so interesting to me about working with these amazing survivors is that some of them have, ended up avoiding romantic relationships. Some of them have had tons of romantic relationships. Some of them have ended up in pretty stable, long-term romantic relationships, but it's made them into such people pleasers, chronic people pleasers, because their experience early on was, I have to keep secrets. I have to keep my own feelings and needs down and just keep the harmony, and don't, like, knowing that they carried a secret that could have ripple effects through their whole family and neighborhood and community. One of my clients comes to mind where it was a next door neighbor, and she went on to find a lovely husband. And I guess I'm saying all of this because there's no one way that these kind of early experiences of having, terrifying parents or abusive next door neighbors or whatever it is, you can't generalize about people when you go down to the nuance. But I think it's really worth asking questions like, and I still do this in my own life, does this person remind me of my mother in some way? Or does this person remind me of my father in some way? Or am I now acting or reacting a bit like my mother or my father in some ways? I think these are really worthwhile questions that could come sort of after the questions that those kids have just asked.
So just going back a step, I'm reminded, and that there's this theme running through all of these live stream conversations that we've had, Rachel, around my relationship with my own needs. And it reminds me of that concept that you introduced, and we must actualize this, of this linear spectrum of, where do I place my needs on the spectrum? Are they not important? Do I, as many mothers tend to do, place everybody else's needs first? Mine don't matter. Or am I at the other end of the spectrum? My needs first at the expense of everybody else's, which you can often see, in some characters, and then am I able to regulate, or, between the two? That's what comes to mind as you're talking, no matter what our experience was growing up, that we can validate our own needs, and that's going to then have an impact on our choice of partners, our choice of friends, our choice of colleagues.
Yes. And I'll add, that's so true. And what you're describing there is that continuum from submission to aggression, and then the window of sort of assertion somewhere around the middle ground. And I want to add also the relationship to our feelings, which obviously feelings and needs are so connected, but they are distinct, because one of the things that's worth saying is, of course, very often in life, our needs won't be supported, or they won't be met in the ways we'd like them to be. I mean, that's true for all of us. So then we need to be able to grieve. This is the function of mourning. The grieving function is that, I really wanted to get my needs met in this way by this person or these people because it was my preferred way, but I can't, it won't happen. And so there's a natural sadness in that. But if I grew up being told, don't cry or I'll give you something to cry about, then we don't have a good relationship with sadness and with grieving either. And really good, trustworthy friends and mentors or a good therapist can help us change the nature of that relationship. So we lose our shame around emotions like sadness or fear, which we may have developed earlier, so that we can feel our feelings, so that we can get to our needs, as you say.
That is, I hadn't made that connection before, Rachel. That's a really beautiful description. So depending on how much we validate our feeling will influence how much we validate the need. That's a very interesting piece of the puzzle. So just going back to these questions, because I did tell my daughter and her friends that I would report back. What are your thoughts on daddy issues? And I have to ask, if a woman's inclined to an older man as a partner, does she have daddy issues?
Oh gosh, I'd have to take a detailed case formulation from the person before I could answer that, because it's so nuanced, right? But I mean, I would say maybe, and it's worth inquiring into the way in which that might be true, and that might not be the only thing. I mean, this is the cool thing about having a human brain, is it can just be one or two experiences earlier in our lives that planted beliefs in our unconscious mind. It can be the simplest little things. I thought of an example earlier today. It was around smells, because my husband and I have very particular smells that we like and dislike. And I was thinking, why does that smell or sound bother me? And I'm like, I think there was maybe one instance earlier in my life. That's right. I get very, very bothered by the smell of mold. And I remember my mum making a few comments when I was growing up, and that's all it takes. So sometimes it doesn't take much. One instance of something that's got a negative association, or maybe a really positive association, and the unconscious mind grabs onto that association and it influences our behavior years down the line. So it doesn't even have to be traumatic. Sometimes it's just this power of association thing. So I guess if someone had a positive experience earlier in life with an older partner, or maybe, vicariously through somebody else, then the belief can just be formed in that moment of this is preferable for some, and you don't even know why. Or we can have an aversion to some sort of people because someone said something, and like it really can be that simple and that small. And it just creates this little, in the brain, little new synaptic connection. And that's all it takes sometimes. So yeah, I would have to have a long conversation with that person to see if any of that is in there, or any beliefs around, people of different ages, like that is a big question.
So I'll report back that, as with all pop psychology, it's worth unpacking and not to generalize.
Not generalize, yeah.
Generalize. Okay, so a little recap. We've started with a great question: how do our childhood experiences manifest in our adult relationships? We've spoken about excuse me, attunement, the way that we were attuned to as children, and therefore the way that we connected to our own needs, and the relationship also with the way that we validate our own feelings. And that, as you say, is a lifelong learning, because, gosh, feelings come in all shapes and forms and sizes. There's been a wealth of information that you've shared around, different kinds of upbringing, particularly, the religious upbringing, for example, where the family may have placed preference on, acts of service, even in preference to the identity of the child. And that's something that, that's come up in connection with my daughter a fair bit, when, I'm seeing that the kids these days don't have the same relationship to adults that we had. And I think they are shifting this social, socialization as the number one priority of parenting. Obviously it is for the youngsters, but there reaches a certain point where it seems to be much more about the individual. And I think this next generation are doing that. But that's a whole other aside.
It's a whole other live stream.
It is. And then to recap on it sounds like there is some sense to the daddy issues, the mummy issues, but that, it's worth considering the individual.
And I'll say one more thing about the daddy and mummy issues, because this seems to be a theme that people could consider. I sometimes ask clients, in your parents' relationship, if they were together for any period of time, who was superior and who was inferior? Now, that's a very blunt question, but just on balance, who kind of had the upper hand, mum or dad? And that's a great starting question.
I want to ask my kids that.
and then sometimes my clients will answer, well, on the home front, it was my mum. but outside the home and on money and things, it was my dad. Whereas other clients will say, oh, definitely my dad called the shots, or my mum called the shots. And then it's like, oh, let's talk about how that's affected your development and your perception of relationships and experience of relationships. Now, when do you kind of slink into that inferior posture? When do you get a bit superior? We don't have to use that language. I know it's a bit pathologizing, but there's something about, like you say, putting your needs, bulldozing them ahead of others, or slinking back and letting other people put their needs first. This is the dynamic along that continuum, and I want to know what they saw their parents do. And so that's definitely worth thinking about if you're listening right now.
Some good journaling exercises right there.
Yes.
So thank you, Stephanie, for all your shared comments. Mia also says, worth knowing, that's something that has come up recently. Okay, so Mia's talking about worth, I think, self-worth. Feel free to give us some more information on that, Mia, if there's something specifically coming to mind. Stephanie's talking about, is there any chance of feeling comfortable enough to get into a romantic relationship at 42? So she's saying, she was she felt she had to play the invisible daughter. Is there still hope at the precious age of 42?
Oh, definitely. I've had clients who haven't had their first romantic relationship till their 40s.
Yes.
Many. I can think of quite a few, actually, because they were the invisible child in their family system. But coming to therapy helped them learn that they are worth getting to know. They are likable. They do have strengths and value in the world. And once you get a better handle on that fact, then you bring yourself out into the world. And of course, you just have to, like the rest of us, you just have to try so many things, try different meetup groups and try different clubs and different ways and dating apps. And there is a lot of courage required, a lot of bravery, and obviously choose the things that you feel are right for you, but try many things if you can, and just keep trying. Like, actually, all of us have to keep trying. I've never got to a point in my life where I've dusted off my hands and said, now I understand everything and I don't need to keep trying. So yes, definitely, Stephanie, put yourself out there, like little bit by little bit, titration, bit at a time. My answer is definitely yes.
Jaren is keen to hear more about the upper hand question, and whether it plays out, because you model the behavior that you saw, modeling that power dynamic, he asks.
Yeah, look, we could do a whole other live stream on that topic, but I guess I could say one thing more, and that is, for myself, I can see moments where I'm like, I'm reacting a bit like my dad right now. And then other moments I'm like, I am really kind of acting out of that mum energy right now, because I've done a lot of thinking about the dynamic between my parents. I've talked to them about it to some degree as well. So I look in myself for the patterns and habits that I learned through osmosis, just unconsciously growing up with them. And they separated when I was 12. So I had 12 years of seeing their dynamic, and then their dynamic as separated parents after that. And I just noticed in myself where what have I learned from my dad, and maybe some of it's temperamental as well, and what have I learned from my mum. And it opens up another frame for considering your own conditioning and your own behavior in relationships. And then once I'm conscious of it, I have more choice. I can ask myself, am I okay to keep doing that, or do I not want to keep doing that? And if my answer is I really don't want to keep doing that, suddenly I'm conscious instead of unconscious, and I can ask myself, well, how do I want to be? What kind of partner do I want to be, or friend or person? Yeah, so that's what I would say about that.
Jaren says it sounds too hard, which I hear that a lot too with clients when I encourage journaling or self-questioning. And I don't know if you have a response to that, Rachel, but even as you're talking, I'm thinking, yes, observing our patterns, it takes headspace. It absolutely does. And it takes time, right?
It takes a lot of time. Yeah, talking about it in a couple of minutes makes it sound quick. This is lifelong stuff, Darren. Okay. And I've only come to this sort of question fairly recently in my own personal life. So just let it smolder, let it marinate in your psyche. It's not too hard because your unconscious will give you stuff if you ask the question. It could take weeks or even months, but asking the question tells your subconscious mind that you would like an answer at some point. Please, if you don't mind, thank you very much. And you can ask people around you, ask for feedback. If you can work up to that. My husband will tell me when I'm acting like my mum. He's happy to share that feedback with me. But it is hard in a sense, you're right. And it takes time, as Alexis said.
I think we are due to wrap up.
Yes,
but just in response to Darren's statement, because, I do hear that life is busy. Who really has the time to reflect on their childhood? And this video is the impetus to do that, because there's clear evidence that the way that we were raised, the relationship that we had with our parents plays out in our romantic relationships, whatever that romantic relationship or absence of even looks like, right? So it is worth it. And, simple mechanisms. One of the most profound practices I've explored, which I'll happily share with you, and I'll put this in the comments so you've got something written down, but it's come from you, Rachel, and it's the nonviolent communication in relation to myself. So I simply do, down the side of one page, I notice, because I feel, because I need, so Lexi or Alexis, would you consider? And I have found that to be such a simple way of unpacking even some seminal moments in my life that I know have had a lasting impact.
It's so true. It's the observations and the feelings, needs, request framework is still a go-to for me when I'm feeling muddle-headed or like it's all too hard as well. Because when it feels all too hard, that's a great start. What happened? How did I feel? Do I feel or did I feel? Often I feel it again as I bring it to mind. Because I'm needing or needed what? Sit down with your needs list with highlighters. Who doesn't love highlighters? And ask yourself, what would I have liked in when we're doing family of origin work? Sorry for the mower outside. My husband's been desperate to start mowing, and I told him he could start mowing at 5:35. I asked myself, what would I have liked to have happened instead of what did happen? So we call that reimagining or rescripting in some therapies. And if I can reimagine my experience and think about what I wished would have happened instead of what happened, I can recreate in my imagination the feeling that I wanted and the need being met. And that becomes a brilliant resource. And how about for our next live stream, to follow on from this one, I could talk us through imagery rescripting or reimagining work, because people can do it themselves. They don't have to have a therapist facilitating it if they have a few starting points for doing that. And
yes, please. Absolutely.
Yes, let's do that next Sunday.
So hands up if you're on board with rescripting. Next Sunday, sounds fab.
Yeah, so it's about taking memories that were traumatic or distressing in some way that may not have any emotional affect around them anymore, but they're still with you, or they may have, or you may have emotions without the imagery, but it's about finding a memory from earlier in your life. Could be 2 years ago, it could be 32 years ago. And then asking yourself, what do I wish would have happened? And then working with that memory and that question to really get in touch with our needs. But I'll talk us through that in detail next time.
Great. So that our listeners can start planning for that. Again, I'll put a little comment just on what you've said now in the comments below, so that you can start simmering, start journaling, and bring it with you next Sunday.
Yeah.
I'm going to be in Melbourne next Sunday, but I'm really keen to show up.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm having a look. We're extending the Empire South. We're having a look for retreat spaces. So I'll be keen to share that with you too. And on the retreat, the experience has evolved. So just really briefly, we're now looking at getting as many different perspectives around, well, look, it really is trauma at the very centre. But having said that, retreat is such a deep and safe and completely confidential space that it won't be a hard, arduous process. Anyway, point being, we're looking at inviting collaborators. The retreat is over half full. So if you're keen to get on board, please make sure that you do that. There's space for probably 1 or 2 NDIS users and their support group. So please be in contact with me directly if you're interested to attend. We have a really beautiful group of facilitators. Our primary facilitator, Dr. Rachel Hannon, we are so lucky to have you for the full 4 days. We're going to be able to really cover a lot of ground. So if you're keen, please put the date in your calendar and make your booking, because the price is actually going up. We're looking at giving a percentage to, I'm in conversation with Blue Knot Foundation, who are not-for-profit, who work with complex trauma. So if you're keen, please book in as soon as you can before the price jumps. Is there anything else on that? Yeah, so the date is the 18th to the 22nd of November. It's going to be good.
It's going to be wonderful. And you'll put a link to that in the comments. Yeah. Okay, great.
Thank you, Dr. Rachel, yet again. Great topic, and can't wait to pick up again next Sunday.
Yeah, me too. Looking forward to it. All right. Thanks, Alexis.
Yeah, and thank you for the great comments, everybody. Thanks for joining. See you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.